All right, it's 5 past the hour. Welcome to week 2 of Professional Civil Engineering. I hope all of you have had a good first week. You've got your courses settled and finalised, and university life for you is now starting to unroll as you get into your subject material. Okay, a few course announcements and details for you. There's been no real changes in terms of the format of the Moodle at this stage, and I'll share that with you as present. So for those of you that are new to the course this week or weren't in attendance last week, Robert Holdham is my name. I'm your lecturer for the term, and the Moodle as it stands is largely unchanged. Couple of points. This discussion with Robert Holdham forum, there's a discussion forum there. I will open that up now. Okay, so you guys, as you've got questions about your assignments, your study and the rest of the details, put them onto the Moodle. I've answered all the questions that have come online over the last couple of days. And I suggest that each of you get into the routine of reading that discussion detail. In terms of what one question a person posts on there, I'm sure another 5 or 6 questions would be of similar origin from other people. So it'll save you a bit of time, and if you keep up with that, you'll get all the detail that you need. And by the time you add to those questions, you'll get the enhanced detail that you specifically need. All right, added to that, coming down the screen a bit further, you've got the lecture attendance and recordings. The lectures are being recorded. This one I've already set up for that purpose. And so for those that missed the lecture and want to review it, or just want to review it anyway, you've got that opportunity to do so. Last week, the assignments were posted. So the individual assignment, which is a dot point brief, which is due in week 4, was posted for you. I've also given out the reflective journal. I'll spend a little bit more time on that tonight in the workshop, because it was a bit rushed last week to discuss that. But each of you are required to put together a reflective journal. And I've given you some exemplars. I expect that many of you now will have looked through those exemplars. They were out of a course in human resources management that I did at this university in 2012. And consequently, you'll see lots of different ways that you can present the information. So have a look at that detail. I've now putting together for you an assessment portal for both the dot point brief and your class test number 1, which comes up at the end of next week. We had a university consultation last Friday, and it was generally agreed in that university consultation that if students have got to upload information to return their tests and other things to the university, you'll only be allowed 20 minutes to do that. As I set the class test up for next week, what I'm going to do, and I'll have this opened up for you tomorrow, is I will put online detail which will be 2 pages. You don't have to fill up the 2 pages. What it will be is a template that I will release to you. I will put a couple of questions about yourself and why you're doing the course. I want you to handwrite your answers onto those sheets, and then scan and then compile those 2 sheets into a single document, and then upload that into the portal that I make for this trial this week, so that I know that everybody has the ability and the facilities to be able to upload the a class test or other details. Now, what I will also release for you later this week is the instruction details for the class test and the template that I will be expecting you to answer your answers on when you do the class test. And the idea behind that is you can print out the sheets for the templated answer. You know all the rules for the class test. So, excuse me, when you open the test on the Saturday of week 3, all you'll have to do is read the questions and answer the questions. So you'll know all the detail of what the class test requirements are. You'll know the template, because you will have printed that out as to write your answers on, and so that will take away a lot of the stress. Come the end of the examination time, you'll be allowed a further 20 minutes to scan and upload your work and put that onto the Moodle submission portal for that. So little bit more detailed for you on that, and it should all work out quite satisfactory. Okay, so more to come. For those that weren't here last week, the week 1 lecture material is up. You can have a read through that. I've got the assessment task, which is the resume and the covering letter. I've got the workshop 1, and I've also got the lecture 1 materials for you to cover. And you were given a couple of readings to follow up through in the workshop. And as you read the workshop materials, you'll know what you've got to write about in terms of your journal. Okay, I don't want a straight dictation of what's in the paper. I want to know what you understand about that and how it's applicable to your life. I'm expecting with this journal, it's going to be highly personalised in terms of what's of value in the course to you and what you need to improve upon. And I would expect maybe if you pick this journal up in 2 years' time, it will have a roadmap in there of what you need to further develop in your professional development as an engineer or as a manager in the longer term. And the journal will still be of use to you outside of completing it for me as part of the requirements for this course. Okay, the week 2 material, you will see there that there's the lecture material. There's a workshop detail that I've given you, and I put out as an announcement over the course of the last 24 hours the Belbin and Mumford questionnaire, and I'd ask you guys to print this out and complete a few pages on it. If you haven't done that, it doesn't really matter. For those that have done it already, you'll understand what I'm talking about in the workshop a lot better. I was thinking through this today. What I will probably do over the next day or so is actually complete a document which I'll call Mr. Bean, that cartoon character, and Rowan Atkinson's character who does mostly his comedy through mime, and I'll put a fictitious Mr. Bean response to these and draw all the details out and show you how that goes together, so that if anybody's got any problems, they can see the mechanisms of how it works, but have a laugh at the same time as to how those questions have been answered. Last part is some week 2 readings that I've given you as well, and we'll cover those in the workshop. So that all said, let's get on with tonight's lecture. This is interesting. Here we go. I was waiting for it to come up. Okay, from everybody's perspective, what I will do tonight is I will run through to around about 5 minutes to 7. We'll have a 10-minute break at that stage. If you guys want to put the questions up as you ask me for that, I will do my best to answer those at that point in time. If I've got to get more information to you, I will do that, but the basis behind it is that we'll go for an hour, have a short question period. We'll then do the second hour and have a short question period. I'll then do the workshop from nominally 8 o'clock onwards, and then there'll be some time for you to ask further questions at the end of the night. Okay, so you'll get a chance to have something to eat, have a drink, and I will need to do the same, so I will charge. All right, For lecture 2, this is on the project management role for infrastructure projects, how we might form a team and how we select and how we deal with the leadership issues within a team. Those are the primary details here. Okay, in terms of the last lecture, we focused on teams. We look at how a typical construction project team is put together. Clearly, we have to have a client. Clearly, there needs to be a project manager. But the other positions that we need within a team include the financier. That might be a bank, or if the company is well-resourced in monetary terms, it may be able to finance the project itself. We would probably need a legal consultant. We would need a design leader. It could be an architect. It could be a structural engineer, or it could be a builder, or it could be a civil engineer, depending on the scope of the work for the project and the makeup of the organisation and where its strengths are in what it does. Irrespective of that, we will need other design consultants to match out in the organisation our shortfalls. Within the project, there would be a main contractor. It may well be the contracting organisation itself, or we may have to hire a main contractor if it's a specialisation of work that the organisation does not have that expertise within. Following on from that, from the main contractor, there'll be other subcontractors. So if we were doing a task, we might need particular foundation engineers, or we might need foundation contractors to do that work. We might need a whole heap of plant construction and machinery to do the work, of which subcontractors have that skill and ability and equipment sourcing to do that work. So they would be reasons why these people would fit into these different categories. We would need somebody who's got expertise in the costing of a project and what would be the expected costs within industry, so that we don't run over, and know the difference between what we can do profitably and what we would need to get in specialist contractors to do, because we can't do those tasks profitably. There would be other consultants. We might need environmental consultants. We might need consultants to deal with community liaison issues. Okay, we might need some publicity managers and how to farm out that information of our projects to the general community for that. Okay, and then we have to be mindful of the end user. So the client may be a public authority, or it could be a private organisation, but ultimately the end users of that project will be the people that will be involved in the day-to-day functioning of that project, and we would have to consider how they will function within that developed and completed work. Okay. We need to think about contract types that we use, okay, and the types of reporting relationships that function around those contract types. What I've put up for you here is a few different contract types that are used in general civil construction and probably parts of the building industry as well. So we could have a separate design contract, and we could have a separate construction contract. So if I was the owner and I wanted to develop a project and I don't have specific knowledge about what I want, okay, so it might be that I'm designing a bridge. It might be the New South Wales government wants to design a bridge. If they haven't got the skills themselves, okay, they would call in a separate design organisation for that and a separate contract, construction organisation contract for the work. In the case for New South Wales, it has the RMS. To their advantage, they have all the bridge design people in there. So it may be a scenario where they choose, the New South Wales government chooses to use the RMS to issue the contract for this work, and the RMS decide that they want to do the design work themselves, but they will let a separate contract on behalf of the government to do the construction work. Okay, so again, here's a particular scenario where a separate and design and a separate construction contract could be awarded to do a bridge, even though the government has the expertise to do the design work themselves. Okay, the government might decide with the nature of the work that it's too specialised. So because up until recently New South Wales hadn't had a tram system running in New South Wales since the 1950s, a few years ago the light rail system was put into contract to run and operate here in New South Wales, and it's only been finished in the last 15 to 18 months. As a result, the New South Wales government never had any expertise with that, so they chose to release that contract to design and develop and construct that light rail system as a design and construct contract. So a head contractor was awarded, and that head contractor was responsible for all aspects of the light rail in terms of its design, the trains and the tram carriage system and the mechanisms used there, and also the construction contracts that then had to follow. Okay. Another way that it might be done by a private owner is the private owner, for instance, might want to build a building on a site. They don't have the expertise to either design nor manage the construction contracts. So what they do there is they release a construction management contract, and they apply due diligence to find out the best organisation that could run that construction management contract. And that construction manager who's in charge of that contract is then responsible to the owner, but they have the obligation to carry out all the processes involved in building that building. So they might let the design out to an architect, and they'll let the subcontract out for the structural engineering to another organisation that is experienced and has the capacity to do that, and they will excuse me, they will release the construction requirements for that work to a separate contracting organisation. Okay, and so what we have is this intermediate step between the owner and the people that will actually build the work, and it's managed on behalf of the owner by a construction management contract. Okay, so what would happen in that construction management contract is the work that would get done, the construction manager would approve the work or disapprove the work, and then advise the owner on the payment for the work that's been done properly, and then they would advise the people employed to do the work to redo the work if it is not at a satisfactory standard. And that would include the architect, the construction contractor, and maybe any specific structural engineering organisations that would be required for that work. All right, so it's a different way of managing how those contracts go together. All right, the next contract is a PPP contract. It's a public-private partnership. So in a lot of the infrastructure programs that get put together by government, where they enter into public-private partnerships. And what happens is the public-private partnerships means that they will get the government agencies contributing to those works, and they will get the private contractors going into development with that. So an example of that might be a road project where the government of the day, through the RMS, might do the design for that road, okay, and then get to a stage there that the government actually wants to have it funded. And so what they do is they release it as a public-private partnership, and the government and the contractor would enter into that, and as a consequence with it, there'd be a whole lot of financial issues that have got to be done, and depending on how the contract has been set up, the contractor may be paid by the government directly, or if it's an issue there that the government doesn't want to pay for it, the public-private partnership would be that there would be a financier brought on board, and the public organisation would take out the finance for that project, and there would be a reimbursement period that the government would pay that organisation back over time for the use of that infrastructure project once it got into operation. Okay, we can have other types of contracts. You can see there a boot contract as part of the delivery methods for contracts. Effectively what happens is we have a build, own and operate contract. Okay, so the government of the day might release an infrastructure project and say, okay, we will pay you to build that project. You will own the project and you will operate the project. An example of that type of contract that has been done is the building of a jail in New South Wales, where the government didn't want to build the jail. They were prepared to let the whole contract out as a build, own and operate, and a private consortium bid to win the work. They won the work, they built the jail, they own the jail, and they operate under a contract with the New South Wales government for that purpose of running the jail and looking after the prisoners. Okay, another contract type that could be released is a build, own, operate and transfer. It's called a boot contract. In the case of a build, own and operate and transfer contract, the government would do something that has happened, say, for the M2 roadway, where they released a contract and allowed the, initially for this, it's actually changed since because there's been some extensions to the M2 motorway, but originally when that was released, it was released as a 31-year contract to run. The government put it in the hands of private financiers and the construction organisations with that. The project got built privately, and then the payback period was that organisation could own and operate that contract for a term of 31 years, and then at the end of the 31 years it would transfer back to government holding. So the company engaged with that would have the working time of 31 years to get the returns on their money and make profit out of that job before the government called for that transfer of the asset to come back to the government. As I said before, since that project was undertaken in the 1990s, it's had some extensions added to it, including extra lanes added to it, and what they have done in that scenario is added more years to the return period for the life of that contract. Okay, so away it goes. All right, alliance contracts. The M7 is an example of an alliance contract. What happens in an alliance contract is we take the best possible experiences from the people interested in the work. So it could be, in the case of the M7, that was a 40-kilometre roadway that got built. And what happened was that they agreed in that they would use the design people within the RMS to design the road, and they would use the construction people who were selected for the work, and they all pool their best assets. So instead of coming up with a problem where in a conventional contract, one party would say, well, that's not our work, that's now your work. Rather than do that, because they had the best of the contracting people available and the best of the road designers available, when the problems did come up, what they could draw on from all of the organisations associated with the work was the best people to solve the problem. Okay, now in terms of that performance, what you get, the outcome of that in terms of performance is that we're actually solving the problems quickly and without duress to the parties involved in the contract. What it means is, in most contracts that have been structured properly as an alliance contract, the job will finish earlier than what it was originally planned. And the reason is that there's no conflicts in contract. Everybody's solving the problems as they arise. The advantage, if it is for a government agency, is the government agency receives that project on time much earlier than what it was first predicted. And for the government of the day, they can open that project and get good political mileage from the general populace that they've built this project well ahead of time. Okay, so that's the basis behind the alliance contract, where we share the problems and we distribute the profits and the praise equally across the people. Okay, the next detail that I'm going to show you has been taken from Oberland's representation of project management. And you can see there that there's three corners to the triangle: the scope of work to be done, the budgetary constraints, and the program or the schedule of how that project gets finished for time. So scope is fixing what needs to be done and defining that properly. Budget is making sure that it comes in within the allocated monies for the work. And then the schedule is making sure that it meets the time requirements that were allocated to do that job. Okay. And so I've got on the second sentence there, the emphasis here is that time overruns are massively expensive due to contract penalty clauses for the quantum of work being administered. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the work being done is sound and is being done properly. And the thing that we're trying to minimise is rework or changes at short notice in the program which upset other work that's been completed. So you can see linking those 3 points on the triangle is the arrows of quality. So the scope of the work has to be properly defined. If we can scope that work out properly, it means that our construction schedule to do that work will be quite accurate. So there's a quality link between scope and schedule. Again, if we look at scope and go to budget, if the job has been scoped properly, it will be priced properly, okay? And there won't be the need to add in all these different extras because the scoping has been thoroughly done, and with that we've got a reliable budget for the work. Okay, the link between schedule and budget gets down to the work quality itself. So what we produce, okay, for what we've scoped and how we've priced that, have we actually got the right materials on the job? Has it been done correctly in terms of specification writing? And if we don't get that right, the quality of the work is poor, and the consequence of that is the work will have to be reworked, and so it will impact both on budget for cost and it will impact on schedule. If it doesn't impact on budget, it means that one of the contractors is going to lose money, and that's not good either. What we actually want is, as we enter into a contract, we want all the parties involved to be profitable. If they're profitable, we will get a good outcome for the project on time. It will be built to the right standard and quality, and it will come in on budget correctly, and what we expected to get built will have been done properly. Okay, so as we get to manage projects, I'm going to bring in now some factors that influence the outcomes of successful management on a project. If you think it through, a project manager has to deal with both external and specific environment issues. and I'm going to enunciate these a bit further for you. The external environment are those factors and forces outside of the organisation that affect the organisation's performance. So the sorts of things that might come in here could be changes in interest rate. Okay, a really good exemplar right at the moment is the COVID-19. It's an external environmental factor that has changed the whole dynamics of how our businesses are presently operating here in Australia and elsewhere around the world. Okay, if we look at the specific environment, these are external forces that have a direct impact on the manager's decisions, okay, and are generally directly relevant to the achievement of the organisation's goal. Okay. So if I now start to get to some of these external factors, okay, the economic conditions could include the interest rate, changes of interest rate, inflation, okay, share market fluctuations as to what the market capital of organisations are and their ability to borrow, okay, and the stage of the business cycle that the organisation is currently dealing in. Okay, if we look at political and legal conditions, federal, state and local government influences would all impact on how we do work with a particular project at a location. We've got employment conditions and the right to hire and fire personnel. Okay, so if we're very highly unionised, okay, on a project, we will have specific requirements that we have to fulfil and meet under that scenario. Okay, again, if we don't do the hiring and the standing down of personnel properly, we'll probably have strike conditions, and again, that has big influence on how the project will function. It also has problems internally on how the harmony between the people within that as different organisations will work. Okay, consideration of the unfair dismissal laws here in Australia and how individuals have the capacity to use the courts, the Anti-Discrimination Commission and the Ombudsman for appeal. And if those factors or those actions get put into play, what it does is it effectively stops the job from progressing, okay, because there'll be hold-ups on the job on a legal stance because of that. Okay, the stability of the country and when the election cycle falls, okay, and that's a really important point because that influences what money is flowing through the economy, and if we've got other circumstances taking place during an election cycle, what you may find is there's a contraction in the amount of money that is available to produce projects because of the uncertainty of that political stability at the time. Okay, the political stability issues for companies operating internationally may have impacts as well as well past this country's shores. I think you could all imagine at this point in time for projects that organisations here based in Australia have happening overseas in a COVID environment would be really heavily impacted and beyond the control of the organisation necessarily running the project because of the inability to get possibly materials because of international trade restrictions. All sorts of impacts come in there if you're trading internationally and how that would work or not work for you. Then we get into the socio-cultural conditions. Okay, so these are the society values, customs and tastes, and they change over time, so the manager has to adapt to that organisation. We could easily slot COVID into this scenario right here. Okay. Consider how the circumstances prevalent today of having more flexible work hours here in Australia. How does a construction project manager adapt the organisation to those circumstances when they've got key and critical elements of work that take a specific amount of time to complete? Okay, so again, these all have to be thought through logically and worked around so that People have got flexibility in their work hours, but yet we can still do those longer construction tasks that would be needed in civil engineering project management and professional engineering practices. Some other issues might involve how the impacts of global warming and greenhouse emissions, pursuit of healthy lifestyles, increasing fear of crime and violence, education and its delivery in the workplace, and increasing dependency on technology and the training for that. So again, these are all socio-cultural conditions that could happen in a workplace that will actually influence the output of the people there and the efficiency of the work being done. Okay, some other external factors. Let's think about demographic conditions. So demography is about people, okay? It deals with encompassing trends in the physical characteristics of the population. Okay, so the sorts of things that we might consider there is gender, age, the level of education of the people, where they're located and where the work is, income level, family composition, okay. Health could come into that as well, okay, as part of that demography. Okay, and then we've got generational differences with our age cohort. So the baby boomers, nominally from 1945 to 1960, Generation X from 61 to 77, Generation Y, which is 78 to 94, which will include some of you guys, and what we term the I generation, which is about 1995 onwards. So there's probably a new one out now, given that we're now 25 years on, and that's about as long as an age that these groupings are generated. Okay. All right. Consider the last group. Okay, which will include many of you. They've grown up using computer technology all their lives. Okay, so it's actually part of their DNA and practices that they've always known, whereas the previous generations haven't known that and they're still adapting. Okay, if you consider the iPhone and how that has changed the world, how long has that been going? That's probably been going since around about 2002, maybe 2005, I'm not sure on that, but it's a relatively recent device, and how that change in telephone technology has really changed our habits and our living styles. Okay, consider that 80% of the world's births are presently happening in Africa and Asia. So how's that going to influence who is in which countries in years to come, and for that matter, the languages that we need to do and use? Okay, so okay, India has one of the world's youngest populations, with more than with more males under 5 than the population of France. Okay, so these demographic factors really strongly influence how we will progress with time in terms of project management and leadership in the teams that we will select. Okay. So it's predicted that China will have more people aged 65 than the rest of the world. Okay. Interesting phenomenon. And how's that going to occur? Because we're going to get medical increases over time, and as the current generations come through now, they're going to live longer and longer. Okay, so lots of things to consider in terms of that demography and how that impacts our profession, project management, and teams in general. If we look at other external factors, okay, we've got technological conditions. Okay, the most technological changes occurred in the last quarter of a century, so from around about 1995 onwards. Okay, information gadgets are becoming smaller and more powerful. We all know that. Companies capitalise on technology. We know that. E-business applications in the construction and infrastructure industries. Okay, what we're now starting to see with our e-business applications is the integration of design and construction And part of that issue is the issuing of 3D drawings, being able to deconflict through 3D images and fly-through images, design aspects that actually don't functionally work in terms of construction. So we're starting to look at that. We are looking at the processes of linking our construction project with the materials and having electronic versions of that construction available that can then go into the maintenance schedules of structures into the future, of how that's all gone together and what needs to be considered and accounted through all the materials that have been used, where they've been sourced, where they've been applied. So huge amounts of technical innovation for our industry in terms of e-business applications for the profession. Okay, we're currently rolling out the NBN. It's mostly finished now, okay, and we've got to deal with the data transfer for speeds. Is it at 100 megabytes per second? No, it's not. Does it need to be with education? Do we need different rates to deal with different parts of the government? If we were to decentralise some of our cities and move some of our government agencies to more rural townships, how would we get on in being able to transfer information over the internet through the NBN, the National Broadcasting Network, to make this function correctly? These are really big questions in terms of the technology and its application in countries. And Australia is a reasonably advanced country, and we're very innovative. We're one of the very first markets around the world to be tested out on new technologies. And so if you're seeing that happening here in Australia, think about other nations that aren't as developed at that, of how they have the hardship of trying to keep up with these technology changes. Okay, another external factor would be global conditions. Okay, so how have international markets been impacted by communication technology? Okay, reductions in cross-nation trade and the establishment of a global market. Okay, we've got international trading that allows organisation to gain cost advantages over other competitors, but at the same time, the global condition with a pandemic has really shown up where the underside is, and the soft underside to Australia in not having a large manufacturing base here. We are dependent on many other nations around the world for importing of goods to meet our requirements. And the question could be asked is, do we need and should we be as frugal with our own manufacturing here in Australia, or should we be doing a minimum amount of manufacturing to keep this country stabilised now that we've got restrictions in trade because of the global pandemic and the closure of international borders? Okay, so that's dealt with the external factors. Let's look at specific environmental factors. Okay, customers, organisation and businesses exist to meet the needs of their customers. So what do the customers want? Their preferences can change over time, or they can become dissatisfied with an organisation's product or services if the quality of the products drop off or the service that the organisation is providing lessens. Okay, and in many cases there, the organisations that they're supplying to will not recognise this because quite simply the customers just stop purchasing from them, and they don't necessarily inform them. And so if you're doing trading and you're not aware of customer dissatisfactions, you may find tomorrow that customer's not trading from you and not realise it. Okay, and it probably reflects how poorly you are linked to your customers. Okay, and are there infrastructure and construction examples? Yes, there are plenty of them. Okay, so that may be something that you could write about in your journal as to how that might come together. All right, suppliers. For civil engineering, it includes material and equipment suppliers. It also includes the hire of labour. So we've got financial services that we might need to fund projects, and it also applies to labour hire companies where we might need people there. So we have materials, equipment, financial and labour suppliers across our profession. Okay, what are the effects when the sources of labour or the employees dry up? Will it constrain a manager? I'll give you a very specific example of this. Many of you would know the Barangaroo site, and there's 3 towers down at Barangaroo. They are commercial office towers. Lend-Lease developed that whole project, and as they developed that project, it was a $6.6 billion project that they were involved with. As they built those offices, they actually put a concrete plant on site on the locality. So as they could fast track the building, they knew that they couldn't get concrete in delivered by truck in the time frame that they needed given Sydney's traffic. So they developed the concrete plant on site. Overnight, the ingredient materials, the aggregates and the cement and the admixtures and other things that they needed for that project were brought into the Barangaroo site. At the start of each day, they had a great resource of materials that they could manufacture, deplete those stocks during the day. I have no doubt that they were still running additional loads of cement and aggregates and admixtures onto the operation during the day. And again, overnight, the next night, they would supplement and boost their stocks and fill their bins and silo capacities for that. Okay, so that fast-tracked the concrete construction. They didn't have any concrete delivery trucks. They installed a pump and pumped directly from the manufacturing site straight to the construction site and put the concrete through a distribution boom network and built those 3 towers. All good, I hear you say. All right, the problem came for Lend-Lease when they were doing the internal fit out for the job. And one of the problems they had on that job is they realised that as these towers went up, the critical skill for them was to actually have wall plasterers. Okay, so these are the guys that actually fit to the internal building frames, the wall sheeting and the ceiling sheeting on the rooms so that those buildings could proceed. And because they were all proceeding in parallel, those 3 buildings, what it meant was that they really recognised there was going to be a shortage of wall plasterers available to them. It was going to hold their job up. So once they realised that, what they did is they let out in advance really big contracts for the wall plasterers to take up. And all of those large companies that could do that work took up those contracts. So as far as Lend-Lease was concerned, they had all the labour in place to do that fit out and not have a hold up for their project in finishing those jobs on time. That worked really well. All those prices came in really competitively, so they got relatively cheap prices by those that tendered the work. The outcome of that is whilst Lend-Lease had all those contractors tied up with the work, there was actually no other wall plasterers to do a lot of the other work around Sydney. So the other builders and contractors doing that work were releasing tenders, and they weren't finding that they were getting a lot of capacity in the industry to do that work. As a consequence, all the prices went up really high because there wasn't that many people that could do the work, and there was a glut of work, and consequently the people that didn't go into Barangaroo won a lot of work at a much higher margin rate than what the people that signed up to do Lend-Lease's work. Okay, so going back, what are the effects of the sources of labour and the employees and the drying up of that? There's a really good example of how a project manager in the first instance recognised there was going to be a shortage for a particular set of skills, released the documents and literally bluffed the industry to come in and supply them. Okay. The outcome for the rest of the industry is the prices went up, and those suppliers who were engaged in the contract with Lend-Lease were doing that work at a substantially discounted margin for the compared to the rest of the industry. Okay, now what does that actually mean? One of the things, if you are a supplier of labour for that sort of work, is I think there would be a few wall plasterers in particular now that wouldn't do all of that work and place all their work in the hands of one contractor, because at the end of the negotiations, they never had the labour supply to do other work, and they were missing out on good margins in other parts of the industry. So whilst it worked for Barangaroo for Lend-Lease for that project, I think the industry smartened up that that wasn't a particularly smart thing for the industry or the plastering industry to actually deal with on a scale that they chose to do. All right. Okay. Next specific environmental factors is competitors. Okay. Project managers can't afford to ignore their competition. As far as project building within the building industry, the civil industry in particular, goes, you're only one job ahead of the rest of the industry in the technology that you use. The reason for that is employees will leave different locations and actually know what's going on. If there's a proprietary system that can be established and a patent can be taken out on it, what can then happen out of that is, whilst that may be known across the industry what it is, the proprietary system will protect the person that invented the system and minimise others from using it directly. They'll have to either substantially change the operation that it warrants a new or another patent, or at best, if it's such a good system, they can sell some of the rights to use that process under patent to other contractors and other project managers. Okay, so competitors, we have through the internet now, we've got international competition of how we might choose to do work within our industry, and we can beg and borrow and take processes from other parts of the world that could be applicable here that have been seen to be proven successful. Okay, so there will always be a more competitive market evolving. It will evolve in several ways through pricing, the availability of new products, and the services or the processes being used to implement them. Okay, and you can see the impacts to infrastructure and construction with that. If I look at China, if any of you want to get onto YouTube, they've built a 59-story building over there using precast fabrication manufacturing to develop all the floors and all the infrastructure, and they erected that in something like 16 days. Okay, so it was effectively a whole lot of prefabrication that happened off-site. All they did was bring that prefabrication onto the location, lift it into position, and then do all the connections between the floors, and the building was built. So could that be adapted here? Yes, it could. Okay, and so we see through the internet and other processes that are happening around the world ways to do work in a faster and better methodology. Okay, other specific environmental factors might be pressure groups. So for the civil engineering, it might be that special interest groups will attempt to influence the action of the organisations. Okay, so we might have protests. We might have people coming to the annual shareholder meetings who ask uncomfortable questions to the board, or they make threats in that meeting that can be publicly disrupt how that organisation does its business. And if you're listening to the news here in Australia, or for that matter elsewhere around the world, you will hear of these things from time to time, that an organisation through one means or another has been forced through pressure groups to change its action and the way that they do business, okay, because of either adverse publicity, or because of maybe environmental problems, or because they creating problems for the future with the processes they're choosing to implement at present. Okay, for infrastructure projects, animal habitat is an important consideration. The effects of groundwater flows and surface water flows in terms of their volume and quality. These are all common areas where pressure groups will raise action. And in the case of tunnel projects, the location of the exhaust stacks and their fallout and their chemistry can also be very emotionally charged with communities. Now, with what I know about chemistry over many years and having been involved with the asphalt industry, one of the things that the asphalt industry did is, as they were heating the materials to go into asphalt, there was a lot of dust that was issued through the very fine aggregates caught in the thermal updrafts and stuff through the plant. And so with the exhaust gases, we were effectively boiling the water out of the aggregates, and so there's moisture going to the atmosphere. But at the same time, with the bitumen heating and other things, there would be other chemicals that were coming out of that effluent. So what the asphalt industry was required to do was to actually take the exhaust gases and pass them through a water tank. And what happened out of that is that the airborne dust was actually settled in the water, and from time to time they would have to dredge out that tank. And the only thing that actually went to atmosphere after that was the steam that was rising off that tank. And so what I'm saying to you with these exhaust gases, there are many, many different ways that we can solve the exhaust gas issue. It generally gets down to a price and how much the contracts have been set up for as to what quality and purity those exhaust gases are being released. I have no doubt that the technology exists that we could actually have very clean gases coming out, but it's the expense that's involved with that to date has not been put into contract operations that limits us. Okay, we're just at 7 o'clock. I might stop at this stage on page 11, and we'll come back to that after the break. I've noticed a few of you have put some questions up on the Moodle at this point in time. I will allow you to do that. Given it's 2 minutes past 7, if we can resume again at 12 past 7, give you 10 minutes break to go and get a drink or something to eat. I'll deal with those questions that have been asked, and then I'll go back onto the lecture material at that stage for the second half of the lecture. All right, everybody have a break at this stage, and we'll run from there. Okay, we'll make a start back again. The questions are up at this stage. I'll read the questions out. I won't identify the person, but I'll then answer the question. So the first question is, what types of questions for class test 1? At this stage, I haven't set that. I will be doing that later this week. As I set that class test, I'll actually write the instructions for it. So you can expect before the end of the week to have the instructions for that test. In tests that I had ran last year, I had short answer questions, and I had used some essay style questions, and I had used multiple choice. I'm not tending to go towards multiple choice at this stage for this first test. I think they will mostly be short answer questions and maybe some detailed explanation questions, okay, where you can be given a specific example and then ask what you would do as the project manager to but leave that with me. I will make sure that you're fully informed on that, and I will go through it in the lecture next week to make sure that everybody hears what I'm saying and it's on recording so that you can review that in study later for week 3. All right, I'll also add there, if there's anybody that's got problems doing the test on that day that they need to speak to me about, send me an email concerning your details. I had a student last year who was working on Saturdays, and I agreed there that I could give them another test on a different day that they could do, and it didn't interfere with that requirement. And for every test that I do prepare, I prepare a supplementary test. So if somebody is sick and you provide me with the evidence for that, I've got no problems about allowing you to do the supplementary test. So normal actions, guys, in terms of how that test goes, and we'll run from there. All right, second question. Does everybody have a good network? Okay. What I suggest with all of the students in the course is that, particularly if you are new to the course, if you want to put some details on the discussion board to me and just put some explanations that other students can read, that they can contact you, that's fine. For those that have been here over the last year or so and they've established networks already, they will be able to talk with one another. But if you're new to it, that's fine. I still have another hour a week that I can actually give you guys by way of an open session where I can put a Teams meeting together for the hour, and you can all come online and talk with me, physically talk with me as I'm doing to you, and you can talk with one another with that. The normal protocol under that scenario is I would moderate it, and I'd use the hands display for people to add discussion. And as you will appreciate, I won't record that, but I will allow you to identify yourselves and identify each other, and so you can contact one another via the email addresses for the participants on this course, and you can make contact that way. All right, if you want to meet on campus, great idea, and I don't have a problem with that, as long as you do it in terms of a strict COVID requirement for it. Or if you want me to book you a room for that, a relatively large room, I'd need to know the grouping size that would be happening, and I can do that as well. Okay. Okay. Question here is: can the answers, this is in terms of the uploading of the class tests, can they be photographed instead of scanned? The answer to that is yes, and I will add this detail for everybody's sake. Because the university is dealing with everybody working remotely, the minimum requirements that you need for your technology is a computer, probably a camera. Okay, you definitely need a sound system and a microphone to hear and to answer. The other things that you need is probably a printer, and then you need some sort of scanning device. I'm quite happy with telephones, but when I release this detail to you tomorrow to complete, I want you to have a look at the quality of the upload that you send to me. Okay, and the best way to do that is actually print it out. What I will tell you now, what I will do with all of your answers that get uploaded for class test 1, I will spend probably about 2 hours and print out and have stapled together all of your submissions, and I will actually mark off the hard copy. Okay, so you need to know that the copy that you are producing is of a reasonable quality that can be read. So what I suggest you do is print out the scanned or the photographed details that you've uploaded, and if it's too light or too dark, make sure that you can accompany and change that around. Okay, but the real testing on this is you can actually do it within the 20-minute period after the class test ends. All right, next question is what is the marking rubrics for the reflective journal? I'll go through the reflective journal again. I haven't put a rubric marking as such at this stage, but I've told you what I will be looking for, and I'll go through that. As time progresses over the coming weeks, I will sort some further detail out for you. But what I'm expecting, whatever you've written this week, as you get into the swing of it, you'll find that your writing will improve, and I expect to see that change in writing to improve through your journal. That's just part of the journey of actually sorting out how you write and put that detail together. Okay, so question is, where can you submit the answers of the Melbourne and the Mumford questionnaires? I don't want that back, and I will be going through that in the discussion with you in the workshop tonight. What it is, it's actually to show you what your learning styles are and how you can be best applied within industry for what your strengths and weaknesses are. So the really good thing is that you can comment upon it privately in your journal. I'll be the only one that sees that, but you'll know as a result of this of how you work with others and how you will be able to get on and get the best out of the industry in terms of the areas that you are choosing to work in. Okay, so that's the guidance I'll give there. All right, with that, I'll get back to the lecture material now. What I'll do is I'll take any more questions at somewhere around about 8 o'clock before we start the workshop, and then we'll get into that workshop material after that. All right, I'll share the screen again with you now. Okay, so just take a moment to come up. Here it is. All right, so with this slide 11, it's talking about organisational stakeholders, and here is a slide here that's got some of those elements that I went down before, the organisational stakeholders being employees, unions, shareholders, communities, and so it goes on. These are the people or the groups that exist within the external environment that act on a project manager's decisions, and I've asked you to provide examples of how they may impact on infrastructure projects. So I'll go through a few of these. I've covered a few already. So when we're looking at employees, okay, how that impacts on the infrastructure is the mix of the employees and their skill sets. As if we don't have the right amount of people, or we don't have the right amount of skill sets with the employees, it means we're going to have to hire people into the project to do that work. Okay, unions. The unions may influence a project by having statements about what are the hours of work for the project. For instance, you may be able to work from 7 until 6 o'clock on a day. but you're only allowed to work a set of number of hours on Saturday and no work on Sunday under ordinary circumstances. So again, that impacts how the length of that project will run. And if you don't get that sorted out in the early times, it's really going to impact on your budget and obviously your schedule because you haven't planned properly. Okay, shareholders, what they may be interested in this era is the environmental consequences of what we're actually doing with these infrastructure projects and how much money goes into that. For instance, we've got a situation with the excuse me, with the banks at this point in time, that it's very, very hard now for it's very hard now for power stations with a coal-fired to actually seek funding to actually have them built, such as the impetus that shareholders put onto the banking organisations. Okay, so the banking people are not just lending now on a financial basis and who can pay and who can afford the money. They're actually lending there according to shareholders' directions, and so they're making a value judgment on community standards with that. Okay, communities may impact a civil engineering project. Okay, the sorts of things that might be impacted there. When they built the light rail project through Sydney, there was no restrictions put on the hours of work anywhere along the route that the contractor had to do that work. So those communities in the centre of Sydney were subject to noise through the day and right through the night for around about 3 years. Okay, and I can tell you now that a lot of the other projects that have since been signed up from that have very restrictive work times put on them so that the local community is not upset with the work around the clock. Okay, suppliers. You can see with the global pandemic at the moment, if we can't get materials from overseas into the country, we're going to have problems with our infrastructure programs that we can't do that. And it will greatly impact the delivery time of that project if materials and supplies run short. Okay, media. Okay, if we have things that go wrong on our project, the media will scrutinise us and make the general public aware of what's going on. And for a project manager doing the job, they'll spend their time dealing with the media rather than spend their focus on actually running the project. Okay, so really important on how that goes. Government influences may impact the release of infrastructure projects in terms of financing, and if there's elections due, it may force the project to be put on hold until those elections have taken place. So again, the external environment can influence how that project will go together. Trade and industry associations, they will provide you with a lot of technology, and they will provide training and other things. So again, how you harness this detail together and the skill sets and the changes of industry that are occurring here and elsewhere around the world will also impact on the delivery of infrastructure projects. Okay, competitors. In the case of competitors, as I said earlier this evening, you're only one job ahead of everybody else in the industry, because what technology and what processes you bring to a project will soon get known to the rest of the industry. So unless there is a proprietary system that you can lock up under a patent arrangement, expect that the rest of the industry, if you've got a good thing going and they can copy it, they will. Okay. Social and political groups. Okay, I mentioned that earlier. These aspects, if we're seen to be doing something wrong in terms of where the community values lie, the social and political groups will have you tied up in court and prevent you from progressing with your infrastructure project. And the way that they operate, as soon as you get through the first court case, one of the other social or political groups there puts another claim in, and you're dealing with that. So it's this long, tedious, linear process if you don't get that management right, and you haven't got good communication with the peoples that the project will impact upon. Similarly with communities, the communities are really looking at how that project will fit into their community. Does it fit? They will be concerned with the construction processes. They'll be concerned with the hours of work. They'll be concerned with if their local traffic is being blocked up and can't progress because you haven't planned properly how to bring materials in and out of the job at staged times. Okay, so they're the sorts of things that could come in there. That could be a question where I put some details together in the class test and get you to make some comments about that, where I give you some answers and you can link the answers up with which particular organisation stakeholder it might be. So they're the sorts of things that could come up in the class test. Okay, let's have a look at team formation. Tuckman identified 5 stages of team formation: forming, storming, norming, performing and adjourning. Okay, we'll go through those. Forming is the first stage of how a group of people come together and join the group, and then they define what the group's purpose is. So when we bring people into a group, they need to be explained what the project is. They need to know how they contribute. They need to know how the others contribute. So there is this issue about how we meet and greet and understand the other people's perspectives and where they fit into the project. And as a team, that's a really necessary stage, because if you get problems with your part of the job, there'll be somebody else within the group who would be able to help you and deconflict those problems so that the group's purpose is able to be achieved. Okay, when we storm things, this is about bringing the people together and dealing with the intergroup conflict. Okay, whose job is it to actually inspect the concrete that it's been laid properly and to the correct thickness, and that the documentation is it's the right concrete that's arrived on site, it's got the right slump. So in the first instance there, it may be a concrete testing company is doing the slump on the concrete and checking the documentation, and then through the placement of that concrete, that it goes down at the right thickness and has been properly compacted. That'll be construction group and the people doing that contracting work. So again, we've got to sort out through the storming where all those boundaries are for the peoples that are in the group. Okay, and again, it's moving past the forming stage. It's actually defining the scope of work and the details that people do to get rid of the conflicts that will occur as the job progresses. Okay, norming is comprising of, once the job's in operation and we get over all the humps and bumps and problems that we might occur in the first instance, we get into the what I will term the routine of the work. And so what we develop as we're developing that routine is the close working relationships and the cohesiveness of all the people in the team so that it actually runs. So we're not dealing with the conflicts that have occurred in the storming about whose problem it is. We're actually defining how we smooth all that out and get the job to actually function. So moving from norming, we get into the performing stage. Okay, the job's fully functional. Everybody's doing their job. We haven't got the conflict in the group. It's a cohesive team with the way that the work is being performed, and there's deep understanding between the parties of how they functionally engage with one another, and they all perform. Okay, if you think of this as an orchestra, okay, we can have the first instance of the people coming together in forming. Okay, who are the people who've got the instruments? Okay, storming is how they actually go together into the orchestra and putting different people into different locations. Norming is under the guidance of the conductor, starting to get all of those parts of the orchestra harmonising together. And then the last part is performing, where you, when they're that good that they're prepared to sell tickets, and you go along and see that orchestra performing. Okay, so there's a really good exemplar of that. The last thing is adjourning. And after a project is finished, we need to adjourn the project. It's the final stage of the development of our temporary groups. And what it is, it's a wrapping up of the activities. The job at hand has concluded and the work then ceases. Now, in many projects and in many areas of engineering, because of the specialisations, as one job finishes, you'll go to the next job, and it may appear that the team stays together to do the next job. That may be the case, but at the end of each job there is an adjourning process where we finish up, and what we are effectively doing is starting a new team together for the future project that comes up. It may appear that there's actually no adjourning, we just move to the next job. And in actual fact, the forming stage doesn't need to exist because we know all those people. Our storming and norming phases are greatly reduced because we've performed with those other people before. So it may be a case where it's actually quite easy to do, but I'm saying to you that as each job finishes, there actually is a formal completion and a new job starts. Because we've got those people going into the new job, it makes those forming, storming and norming elements all that much easier for the new job. Okay, I've put on the slide 13 here the difference between work groups and work teams. Okay. In the older days, a work group, and this is generally how we did business in the 1970s and probably in the 1980s. We had a leader in charge of the group. Okay. You're only accountable to yourself in terms of in the work group. You're accountable for the work that you did. The purpose for a work team is the same as the broader organisation purpose. So what you were doing is to the end, you're working towards the end point of what that job was. You did individual work. Meetings were characterised by efficiency and no collaboration. I remember many industry meetings that you would go to. There was no chairs, you stood. It was a very short briefing time, and then after that you took the information that you needed to do your job, and there wasn't a lot of discussion across the other people's of how they did theirs. That was their responsibility. Other things in terms of performance of a work group, it's measured indirectly according to its influence on others. Okay, so in other words, we were evaluating the individual work and how that was performed. Okay, and work is decided upon by the group leader and delegated to the individual group members. So the team leader there delegated all the tasks out, and the people within that group that constituted its members did as they were told and did the tasks they were asked to do. In this era, in working in work teams, it's entirely different. Okay, the leadership role is shared. The reason why we do that is we're going to have different people with expertises, with different expertise in the team. As a consequence, there'll be parts of that work where the same leader will not have the same effect if it's required that a more experienced person in another area of work is the key person in the work team at that stage. So the leadership for the functionality of that job will be handed over. However, I will say this point, that the project manager for that, if he's got work teams working within, the project manager will direct those work teams, but within the work teams they will then share the leadership as required. Okay, as against to work groups, the accountability is also not only to yourself, but also to the team. Because if you don't do your work, the team can't function properly unless your work done is done properly to enable that team. Okay, the team creates specific purpose. So why do we pull a team together? We want to achieve a particular outcome using a set of skills and processes that are engaged with the people that we've involved in that team. Work is done collectively, so we're looking at the outcome of the team and we work to that purpose to make sure that the team functions well. And it will probably mean that we've got to collaborate as individuals, not just do individual tasks, and we'll collaborate with many other people in that work team. Meetings are characterised by open-ended discussion and collaborative problem solving, okay? And in many of the courses that you're doing at the university in these postgraduate studies, part of that is you are doing group work, okay? And part of that is to get you engaged with other people, and particularly around the world in their thinking and the processes they use and the technologies that they use, which may be different to you, because that enables you to get a better perspective of how that goes. Now, I haven't got group work happening in this particular course, but my other courses do have group work. So in this one, this is a highly self-reflective course on the things that you need to put in place for your further development. And that will be enhanced as you discuss that with others in other courses. Okay, so take the merits of what's happening in this course for the purposes that it is intended for. Okay, performance is measured by directly evaluating the collective work output. So yes, we want you to work well and work thoroughly, but the output of the work is how that group or how that team performs in getting to its finality and its outcomes. Okay, work is decided upon and done together, so that is part of the open-ended meetings and the collaborative problem-solving issue. And the work teams can be quickly assembled, they can be deployed and otherwise put into action, and once that's done, we can conclude them, break them down and not have them, and we disband that work team once it doesn't need to be functional anymore. Okay, so that's a really good example, and it's probably a very key example of how your parents have done work on this side of the work and how you will go into industry and how it's done in the future. Okay, really, there's a really big difference. Okay, I'm going to deal with some leadership theories and leadership traits. So who is a leader? And the definitions in the references is someone who can influence others and who has managerial authority. Okay, so not only do you have to be able to influence people, you've actually got to be able to command those people through the managerial authority. And leadership is the process of influencing a group to achieve its goals. Okay, we can have trait theories of leadership. So trait theories have tried to isolate characteristics possessed by leaders from others. The sorts of things that they might be characterised by would be intelligence, charisma, decisiveness, enthusiasm, bravery, integrity and self-confidence. Okay, so these might be just individual traits where we're looking at who's got particular traits that will separate them from others. In terms of what charisma is about, it's about how to influence and change people, so that ability of persuasiveness. But at the same time, in leadership, we might need decisiveness. In other words, making a decision, and we're going to take this particular route as against to other routes, and there may be a need for that. Okay, and so that comes together. All right, behavioural theories of leadership. These are identified behaviours that differentiate effective leaders from ineffective leaders. Okay, and the studies concluded that leaders could be trained rather than using behavioural traits as the reason for selecting. Okay, so So if you've got a really good ability to influence other people, you could be something that might be referred to as a charismatic leader. Okay, charismatic leaders in history would include people like Gandhi. Okay, where they could persuade, in his case, nations to behave in particular ways. All right. And then there's some styles of leadership, and through the Iowa studies, through the University of Iowa, they looked at autocratic style, democratic style, and a laissez-faire style. So an autocratic style is a leader who tends to centralise the authority, dictate the work methods, make decisions for the group, and limit the employee participation. So if we jump back 2 slides, an autocratic person would be a person that would lead the work group in this style of operation. They take charge, they tell the people what to do, they expect the people to follow them in those decisions and not question their decisions. That's the autocrat that would be making those decisions. A democratic style would be a leader who would involve the employees in decision making, delegate authority, okay, engage participation in work methods and goals, and so it goes on. So just straight off from what I've put in the writings here, this would link back in to maybe working in teams and what's expected within a team. But could an autocrat run a work team? Yes, they could. They may have those personalities themselves, but they realise how the team functions and allows the team to function. So there's no reason why, if we looked at a leadership style of a particular individual, they couldn't change their style to actually be adapted to a particular requirement on a job. Laissez-faire style of leadership is generally a leader who can give the group complete freedom to make their decisions and complete their work in whatever way they see fit. So the example that you might have with a laissez-faire leader is the laissez-faire leader in its extreme might say that we've got a job here, guys. I've got all you people to do the work. You get what other people that you want to do the work, but the job has got to be completed for $10,000 and I need it finished by the 28th of February 2021. So they've delegated all the responsibilities to the group. They've put the constraints on them in terms of money and in terms of performance, and that leader would allow that group to do anything that saw fit. Can that exist today? Yes, it can, but generally it doesn't because of all of these other issues, and I'll go back about 3 or 4 slides. Because of all of these issues here, in terms of organisational stakeholders, if a laissez-faire leader doesn't address some of these, the job will come to a blinding halt because there's actually nobody looking after all of these groups. Okay, so within limits, these styles of leadership can work quite well. There is another style of leadership, and that's called a bureaucratic style of leadership. And a bureaucrat just follows a rule book, okay, and expects everybody to work by the rule book. Okay, so these studies from Iowa State, they identified 2 behavioural dimensions for the leadership, and that, they identified 2 important behavioural dimensions for most of the leadership behaviour described by the subordinates. And the first one was the initiating structure. Okay, so for those people that were working under that leader, to make them come in and spring into action, the extent at which the leader was likely to define and structure his or her role and the group members in the search for that goal attainment. So it was the detail of how that initiating structure for that group was to perform that got down to how well they could define the goals and then attain them. So a lot of time needed to be spent to actually define the expectation of the members and the goal attainment. All right, next one is consideration. The extent to which the leader has job relations characterised by mutual trust and respect for the group members' ideas and feelings. So this is about how the people in the group felt about themselves and felt about working for that leader. And it's about having a positive identity within the group and having the respect from that leader in understanding what each of those people were contributing to the job and their effective contribution to that were being recognised. Okay, so it's the consideration between the leader and the group members. It starts one way from the leader, characterising that, and it's exemplified and seen by the team members by the responses that the group leader gives out to those people within the group as the job progresses. Okay, last slide for tonight before we get to the references. The discussion questions. What style of leadership best suits the running of an infrastructure project? Okay, it's a good question. There's no right or wrong answer to that. It's a matter of defining those details, and I've probably covered that as I slipped back 3 or 4 slides ago to explain each of those leadership roles and how they can function for the different work scenarios. Okay, are there any other leadership styles that could be used? And I've said here transactional leadership, charismatic leadership and transformational leadership. I've not given you those, but I want you to have a look and search for those as a leadership style and have understanding of how they may be used within the construction industry that you're associated with, engineering and professional civil engineering. Okay, what part does credibility and what part does trust play in leadership today? Okay, so you're going to have to understand what those two terms mean and then think about the interplay between the team leader and the people within that group as to how this works. Okay, so they're the questions, and they can come up in discussion in your diary if you choose to do it there. But they're big questions that you need to think about in terms of what's been discussed tonight. Okay, 2 books that I have used is the Oberlander book and the Robbins, Bergman, Stagg and Coulter book, Management, which is the 7th edition, chapters 3, 13 and 18. So where this information has come out of, that's come out of the second reference. Okay, so I've sourced that where the reference is for that. Okay, it's just coming up to 10 to 8. I'll just, I might use that as the convenient time to shut down for 10 minutes and we'll start again at 8 o'clock. So I'll answer the questions as we come back. I see one there. What's the difference between democratic style and laissez-faire style? I think I've answered that. If I haven't, put the discussion board question up again and I'll answer that for everybody. But I want you to have a think through it, and maybe if you have a read of those other leadership styles of transactional leadership and the like, and put just a bit of study into those different definitions, that will come clear to you. Okay, so the laissez-faire style, just to quickly answer that again, is effectively the leader defines what has to be done, but doesn't tell the team how it is to be done and leaves the team to decide that. Okay. Another example of the laissez-faire style, the only impositions they will put on is maybe the budget constraints and when the job's got to be finished by, but how you go about doing that, the laissez-faire leader couldn't care less as long as it meets the requirement. Okay, and so it goes on. There's a problem with that, and that gets down to site safety as well, because that leader can't delegate his responsibilities for safety. So there's a few things that need to be considered within our industry that laissez-faire style leaderships will have problems with. All right, it's now 8:52. We'll start at 8:02, and you have 10 minutes to get a break, and we'll come back then with the workshop. Thanks, guys. All right, so I'll stop sharing. Okay. All right, we'll just wait a couple more moments before it clicks over to 802 and kick in again with the workshop. All right, I will share that content with you. Okay, to kick off with, are there any other questions that I need to answer at this stage? Let's have a look here. Right, there's a few more coming in. Okay, I'm trusting that you can all hear me at this stage, so I'm looking at my microphone and it's working, so away we charge. All right, so I've dealt with what's the difference between democratic and laissez-faire leadership style. Next one is how to reference the lecture material in the journal. Okay, the way you do that is you can put it down as CVEN 9742, Professional Engineering, Week 2 lecture, page such and such. I'm happy with that. Okay, it doesn't have to be in any more detail than that, and so it goes together. All right, looking down here. Okay, yeah, person concerned's got their laptop sorted out, so that's all good, and they got their sound back. Okay, I'll kick on now with the workshop. Again, at around about 8:45 or thereabouts, I'm hoping to be finished, and I'll deal with any later questions there. They're long sessions during the evening, so I'm sure you'll be ready to go and eat something substantial after the discussions I've had with you tonight. All right, workshop 2, I have given you 2 readings, and I've done this for a particular purpose for you. It will become obvious as we read this page in a moment. Okay, they're relatively recent readings. They're both in 2006. One's in 2009, the other's in 2016. And what I'm asking of you is, in your journal, reflect about what's been given in the lecture and how the experience of Daniel Kenny outlines agrees or is different to the lecture material. So it's about leadership, okay, and as a consequence of that, you'll be able to pick that up. Kenny works for Coffey and Partners. Coffey and Partners do geotechnical work on civil construction sites. So it's about aligning our professional industry with one section of industry and see whether some of those leadership elements that I've covered today exercised in that writing. Okay, you are also at liberty here for the second paragraph to write about your experiences in engaging and working with others in a team. And you can provide examples of that experience, what went right with the team and what went wrong, and how might you improve it if you were given the opportunity to lead that team in an environment in the future. So very much self-reflective as to how you go. As you experienced in the lecture material and the presentation, there is some theory and a lot of personal issues. There is much psychological content as what it is management theory and practice. Keen's paper, which you will find substantially long, has been written by him as being a psychologist, okay? And it will give you a different perspective than what an engineer or a construction specialist would ordinarily consider. Now, because this paper's long, I've introduced it for a particular reason. From the first time I did it, particularly with overseas students, do we have to read all this information and digest it? And I put this long paper in there for a particular reason. And that is for all of you to learn that what you need to do is scale your reading to a stage that you're getting to key information quickly. And with this paper, follow this process. The first thing that you will do is read the abstract and get an understanding of what the paper is about. The second thing that you do is you then read the introduction. And the introduction puts up the premise of what the paper is about and goes through an explanation of how they're going to organise the paper and develop its outcomes. You then go to the conclusion and read that. So if you read nothing more, you'll know what the paper is about and what its outcomes are. It's sort of like reading the first chapter of the book and the last page of the book to find out whether it's a good book or not. That's exactly what this is about. So from there, if you were to read the book, or in this case, read the paper, and you don't like the abstract, and you don't like the introduction, you don't like the conclusion, okay, you're not going to read any further. And what I'm saying to you is when you are searching for information to write in your assignments, and when you're searching for information on technical issues for your industry, when you're professionally employed, you've got to get through the reading material particularly quickly. And so with that, you cheat. And you cheat by reading abstracts, introductions, and conclusions. If it makes sense and it's got some good points in those three elements, you then read the chapter headings. Okay, from the chapter headings, you'll drill down and you might look at some of the diagrams and the sketches and other visual information that will give you key information quickly. And after that, you're going to form an opinion on the paper, whether it's worthwhile reading in total or it's not fully applicable to you. Now, there's all different ways that can progress. You may read some of it, and some of it's interesting, but then it gets off track and then you stop reading it. My point being is you have to be able to deal with the quantum of reading throughout your life, and particularly if you're in a second language, of how to get to the nub and the key issues with these pieces of writing very quickly. Okay, so, and I've said in the last paragraph, some of you will think this piece of writing will be of value, and so you'll read and absorb more. And some of you will look at this article and say, well, it's not much value, and you'd cast it aside and you'd look for other sources. They're all relevant things, but what you can do is you can reflect on this process that you're going through to write about that in your reflective journal, because that will influence how you go about reading things in the future. Now, just off the page one and where we are at the moment, by looking at the lecture notes and other things that have gone by, there's probably 3 pages of writing for week 2 already covered. So now what you have to do is you need to be selective about what you're going to put into your reflective journal for this week. You won't be able to write about it all, okay? But the things that really impact on you the greatest will be the things that you will write about the most, okay? So be aware of that. Don't come back to me, there's too much stuff to write about and I can't put it all in. You write about the things that give most influence to you. And as you're talking to your buddies and your classmates and peers, you will find that what you find interesting or worthwhile writing about will be different to others. And I fully expect that. Okay, so there's no right and wrong answer. Validate what you're writing about in terms of the impact that it has on you and why it's important to you. Okay, so I'm not after a summary of what I've given in the lecture. I'm after, in your journal, how it impacts on you and what you need to either put into action or think about in the future of how these might influence you. All right, I'll get to the Belbin analysis shortly and the Mumford analysis. I'd ask you to make a printed copy of this, and yesterday I asked you to fill that out. I'll go through that shortly with you, but we'll get to the reflective journal. Okay, and in the reflective journal, I've given you some things here that you might think about in terms of the Belbin analysis and the Honey and Mumford exercise questionnaires that you've done, and how that testing brings out your habits that you may want to share with me, and the influences that will have as you go forward and progress into industry in the immediate years ahead and other years ahead. So irrespective of the results on any team position, you can be expected that you'll be required at some stage in your career to perform these roles. Okay, so how will that Belbin analysis and the Honey and Mumford questionnaire influence that outcome? Okay, the result generated for you shows your most preferred roles from the highest scores down. As technically trained people, which engineers generally are, you should consider that you are a specialist and you'll quickly gain knowledge and will be expected to contribute to the specialist capacity. I'll explain that when we go through the Belbin analysis. At this early stage of your career development, expect that you will be regarded as a team worker. In that capacity, you would be expected to be assigned as a resource investigator, and it will help you to quickly build industry knowledge and other specialised knowledge. Okay, so at the moment, for you guys, whether you're working or whether you're going to go into work once you finish your master's coursework, you'll be actually like a sponge sucking up all this information about how the processes and the engineering understanding goes together. Into the future, again, as you gain more experience, then superiors in having more confidence in you will capitalise on that experience, and you can expect that you will be placed as a coordinator, shaper and an implementer. Okay, and you can write about those points as we go through that tonight, and so it goes on. All right. Okay, what might you expect in the Belbin results? I'll go through this I might go through this again after we've done the mechanics of those questionnaires. All right, your individual assignment, just to bring you back up to date, you should be getting on top of that at this stage in sourcing your material. And I've said here, for the company that you're looking at, look at the internet, look at the company annual reports, look at the company or the organisation's website, look at the projects that they've completed, any newspaper reporting as your primary research starting points. Now, you shouldn't have any problem getting all the information that you want. The problem will be in how you cull that information down and present it in 3 pages. Okay, some of it might be by tables, other parts of it will be by explanation, other parts might be just dot points that you might put together. And it's due in week 4, and I will have that submission portal open from the beginning of week 4, because I don't want people putting the class test into that wrong portal. So I'll keep that closed until week 4. It'll be opened on the Monday night as we do the week 4 lecture, so there'll be plenty of time for that. All right, last detail on the workshop is preparing for class test 1. Because I've been organising workshop groups for the 250 odd undergraduate thesis students, I wasn't able to put the template up that I want you to become familiar with this by this time. I'll get that up tomorrow for you. And what I want you to do is read the instructions, download the file, print out the file. If you haven't got a printer, download the file and take it to a friend's place and print that out in advance. And therefore, even if you haven't got a printer, you'll still be able to prepare for the uploading for that. I then want you to write in hand script, your hand script, answers to the questions. They don't have to be particularly long. They do have to be legible so as I can read them. I then want you to scan the 2 sheets that it's on and put that into a single PDF and upload it onto the Moodle. And you should be able to scan, compile and upload within 20 minutes. Okay, as I said before on one of the questions that was asked, can you take photographs of that? Yes, use your phone. What I suggest to you is that you get into a well-lit room and make sure the phone is very vertical over the page, and you'll get the good contrast without the shade effects coming onto that paper as you're taking that photograph. All right, and I will have for you the instructions for class test 3 out later this week, and that will tell you the types of questions that are being asked, and that will get around a couple of the questions that came up that I've already discussed through the lecture time tonight. All right, I'll dispense with this at this stage. I'll take questions on the workshop writings later. I'll get to the Honey and Munford details right now, and we'll go through that. Before I do go, the readings are in this folder. Okay, so there's the Keen and the Kenny readings. So as you want to read that, that's where you'll find them. And the Belbin and the Mumford questionnaires are as given. Okay, so what I have put for you here is a teamwork self-perception inventory. What this means is off the Belbin analysis, it will analyse for you how you would fit into a team. Okay, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Okay, and the sorts of roles that you will perform in a team. So I had asked you to complete the first 2 pages of the Belbin analysis. Okay, so that's these 2 pages down to point 7. And what it asks you here, the directions are for each one of these questions, 1 to 7, you have to look through the 10 answers that are given and assign points to them. And the maximum that you can get is 10 points when they're all added up. So if you looked at these answers, these 10 alternates, you might give 2 marks to part A, 2 marks to part C, 3 marks to part D, and another 3 marks to part F, and that's as many as you would put in. Okay? Another person might say, well, I'll give that 1, I'll give that 1, I'll give that 1, I'll give this one 2, and I'll give this one 5. Does that work out right? Yeah, it does. And that's as far as I would go. And another person might say, well, this one here for C, that's worth 5, and this one here for H is worth 5. That's the 10 marks. So for each of these bold questions, for the 10 alternates that you were given, you assign a set of marks to those numbers. If you want to give them 1 each, I'm quite happy with that. It's generally not the case. There'll be some things that you will agree under that heading, and there'll be some things that you don't. Okay? All right, so that's how that has gone about. Again, you do the second set of questions. Now, all of you guys will probably know the character of Mr. Bean, okay, and his teddy. So I'm going to fill this out as though Mr. Bean was filling this out, and I'll draw a picture of Mr. Bean and his teddy up in the corner, and I'll photocopy that out with the results that come together, and then how all that data is transferred off these 7 sets of questions. All right, so for those that have done it, this is now what you do. So you've got section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and here are your letters A to H in each of those examples. So you've got, I think, 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, you've got 8 different columns here which relate to these 8 different answers. And what you do is you put the marks in. So if you gave 2 marks for section 1 and question A, so if you gave 2 marks to this particular question, you go 1A and you transfer those 2 marks down into this matrix. So some of these will have numbers in them, some of them won't. If you add across this way, all of those numbers should add up to 10 because they're all in the first question. And likewise for question 2, 3, down to 7. Okay. From there, you will add up the grand total and it should all equal 70. From there, what this does is it then sorts out the way that you've answered the questions. So you'll see here 1A had 2 marks. If 1A has 2 marks, you look for 1A and you'll put 2 marks in this RI column here. And so you transfer all of the marks that you've got into this different matrix format. And then after that, you'll add up all of these columns. Okay, all of these columns, and it will give you numerical values for each one of these abbreviated descriptions. Okay, so what I now need to do is to explain what happens out of this. So the first thing is what these terms mean in terms of these identifications. Okay, so as far as this verbal analysis works, I'm going to explain these to you. So an implementer is a person who actually will do the job. They get the job done, they've got fair focus, and it tells you the typical features of them and their positive qualities and things that you need to allow for in their weaknesses. Okay, so they've got good organising ability, they've got practical common sense, they're hardworking, they've got good self-discipline, but generally some of their weaknesses might be a lack of flexibility, and they're pretty unresponsive to somebody's ideas if they're not proven, because they're going to waste their time. Okay, so time is an issue there. The coordinating role, this might be a team leader's role. They're generally calm, they're self-confident and controlled. They have a capacity for treating and welcoming potential contributors on their merits, and they don't make judgment on those people at that initial meeting. They have a really strong sense of objectives and what's got to be achieved. Okay, and so that goes together. Okay, no more than ordinary in terms of intellect or creative ability. Okay, what they're after is process, and they can work to a process and make that function properly. Okay, a shaper. These are people that are trying to influence others. So they're a bit highly strung, they'll generally be outgoing, and they'll be quite dynamic in how they conduct themselves. They have a drive and a readiness to challenge inertia. In other words, if things are going slow, they'll stir the people up or the event up to get it into action. They may be quite ineffective themselves, but they can shape others to do the work. And they've got probably self-identity issues and tend to be self-deceptive as to what they can do. They'll be like a billboard and tell you everything that they can do, but they actually don't have the capacity to do the work themselves. Okay, they're highly sensitive if they're I can't pronounce the word that I need there. Yeah, so if they're put to provocation, they will be really sensitive on the review of their work. They may be a bit irrational in how they do their explanation, and they will be impatient if they see the work not going on. All right, plant. It doesn't mean civil engineering plant. Okay, the plant is the person that actually comes up with the ideas. So this is the ideas person. Okay, they're very individualistic, they're very serious-minded, and their approach to projects may be somewhat unorthodox by comparison to other people. So they will be thinking maybe outside of the box for solutions, and as such, they got great imagination. They can understand what's going on in terms of the intellect issues. They understand the knowledge, and they can actually make the thing work. And for that reason, they become a genius in terms of how to actually get this thing to function and work really well. Okay, so the problem is with them is they may be so obsessed with their outcomes that they forget the rest of the people, and they don't follow the normal protocols. So the sorts of things in industry, in our industry, in the construction industry, where they could come unstuck, is they don't think clearly about the safety implications, and that process may be a fantastic process, but it's actually quite dangerous. Okay, and it may need somebody else to rein them in to actually tone down what they want to do so that it's actually functional and it won't injure people. So that's what the plant is, It's about dealing with those ideas people that can really get the thing going and get good outcomes happening, but you need to think about the practicums of how it fits. Okay, resource investigator. Every one of you at this stage of your career is a resource investigator. Okay, you need to be enthusiastic and curious and be a good communicator and trying to find out new things and ideas about your industry that you're working in. Okay, you have the ability and you need to have the capacity for contacting people, exploring anything new, an ability to respond to a challenge, and the weaknesses that we will allow for you is that you might be fascinated with what's going on, but we've actually got to get you back on track. Okay, so all young engineers going into the profession or in that profession in your early years should be a resource investigator, knowing how it works, why it works, where it's applicable, where I can apply that in different arrangements. So that's the real enthusiast part of what the profession is about. Okay, a monitor and evaluator. Okay, these are the guys that actually keep you on the straight and narrow and make sure that you work to budget. They make sure that you work to time. They make sure that you work to quality. Okay, so they are the sobering thoughts in the organisation or the team. They're unemotional. These are the things that have got to be done. They will be conservative in what they allow to happen, and the outcome is they're giving you prudent judgment as to that process. They will be judgmental. They will be discretional in terms of how they do it, but they'll also be hard-headed in what needs to be done. Okay, it's the mechanics of how this thing goes and how they're going to evaluate it. Okay, the weaknesses, it may lack inspiration that perhaps the resource investigator might do or the plant person might do, but they also will not have the ability to motivate others because they will be seen as being a bit pedestrian and just wanting to follow a set process. There's nothing wrong with that if it works, and particularly if you've experienced this process before and you know that it works, it may be the best way to go. Okay, but for the person that's dealing with that, to understand them, these are the strengths and their weaknesses that go together. All right, every one of you guys is a team worker, okay, at this stage of your career. You need to be socially orientated. You need to be sensitive to other people's ideas and details. You need to fit in, so you've got to be relatively mild in your approach in dealing with other people. And what you need to be able to have is an ability to respond to people in any situation to promote the team spirit and get the best out of them at all times. Okay, it's not about you, it's about getting the best from the team. Their weaknesses is they may not be decisive at moments of crisis, and part of that comes about is the lack of experience that you may hold at that point for that event. And so you want a different sort of person and a different set of characteristics to actually make that decision. Okay, and that's completely understandable given the experience levels that each of you guys would have at this point, and so it goes on. Okay, complete a finisher. Really, really hard job for engineers. Okay, and the sorts of things is these people are painstaking. They are about process. They're about orderly and organisation. They're conscientious and they're anxious. These are the guys that actually, when you put the tender together, put all the I's and dot the T's and dot the I's and cross the T's on all the tender documents and check back through the paperwork or the contracts that you are putting together, and they follow through all of those aspects of it with very strong personal belonging to that, and they're after perfection with the outcome that goes. They don't want mistakes to happen, and they're a particular type of person that's needed in engineering, and the engineering profession itself can do with far more completer finishes. Okay, to give you an example of where this comes together, when you put a group assignment together, somebody in the group has actually got to write the assignment out, get all of the spelling mistakes out of it, get the references consistent through it, read through the English so that it actually makes sense, okay? They are the completer finisher of what you are doing as a group assignment submission, okay? And many of the other group members, or you might only be dealing with one or two others, will get frustrated with this person doing that job because they've got the responsibility to make sure that it's all correct. And the other guys say, no, it's good enough, let's put it in. Okay, so that's the headache that occurs to others engaged with a completer finisher. Okay, they have a tendency to worry about the small things, okay, and they have a reluctance to let go. And I'm sure that in your group assignments, you can relate to that quite well. So the big issue is with these that we actually get all the right things in all the right spaces. We address the detail using the completer finisher and allow them sufficient time, and that's a really key point, to actually tidy up and get everything thorough before it gets submitted or be finalised. Okay, the specialist. The specialist is a person who is exactly that. They specialise, they're self-starting, they're dedicated to what they do, and they're single-minded about what they're doing, okay? And they provide the knowledge and technical skills about particular aspects of work that we do as professional civil engineers. And they can only contribute on a narrow front, but they're brought into a team because of those specialty skills that come about. Okay, so having spent the 10 minutes to 8 or 10 minutes to explain all of those points, what will happen out of this is when you add your points up, I expect what you will get is probably 2 high scoring numbers, and you'll get 2 low scoring numbers. But I said to you before that you are all team workers, okay? You are all, I need to go to the list here, you're all resource investigators, okay? And at this age, for this industry, they're probably the 2 common things that you will have. Okay, I expect for the majority of you, you will be poor at completer finisher, and you may be poor at leading the group. Okay, so this might be the implementer, and so it goes on. Given my age and my experiences, I'm really strong in these ones. I'm actually quite strong in this completer finisher area. Okay, I'm good at the other things, but this is, as time has gone on and I've led organisations, and particularly with my military experience, this stuff up this end comes very clear to me. Okay, and in my engineering, as a plant guy with particular skills, I've got good experience in particular lines in that area. So what you'll find here is you'll have probably 2 really strong numbers and 2 weaker numbers. Overall, what I want you to think about is the 2 strong numbers is what you can capitalise on the industry at this point about yourself. The 2 weaker numbers are the things that you'll probably need to develop over time to round yourself out. And as you gain more experience, these other issues of the command and the authority of the group will come to you naturally. Okay, and I don't think there will be any surprises when you sit back on that. It's trying to just get a reflection of who you are. There's no right or wrong answers, and you can put into your diary, if you choose to do this, to write about yourself, about what your strengths are, and that may influence where you want to go into the industry as part of that. So if you're a really strong completer finisher, you might be wanting to work in specification writing. Okay, you might be wanting to work in construction organisation, putting tenders together to actually do the writing up of this work. Be contributing on this, be a major part of the contributor to do the writing. If you're a major part of this, you're actually going to be part of the negotiation team in discussing a lot of that tender documentation with the people that you'd be tendering to. Okay, so that gives you the detail for that. Okay, useful people to have in the team, we've covered that detail. That's got through the Belbin analysis. Okay, the Honey and Mumford Learning Styles questionnaire is how you learn. Okay, it says here it'll take you 10 or 15 minutes to tick or cross the 80 questions. I want you to do that. It'll teach you a lot about yourself, of how you learn and how you interact with other people. Okay. Again, when you get to that, what you will do is you are going to score all the elements that you have ticked. And what you will do is you'll just circle all the questions that you've answered with a tick. So if you tick question 2, you put a circle around it. You may have put a cross against 4, so that doesn't count. You'll put a tick around question 5 if you've answered that. And all that we're doing is we're transferring these numbers down into 4 columns. And what you'll get is a score. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 scores, and all we're doing is we're adding up all the ticks in this column, likewise for the other 3 columns. Okay, when you do that, you've got these 4 axes, okay, and they relate to these traits. So you'll have a number here. So if this value for an activist was 10, the reflector was 12, the theorist was 14, what would happen is the activist, you would come out here, the activist, you'd come out here 10. The reflector was 12, you'd come out to here. The theorist was 14, and maybe as a pragmatist you're on 5. So what you'll then do is you'll draw your shaped diamond on the scorecard. And what it does is it tells you where you are and the learning styles for those descriptions. Now, I'm not going to go through those learning styles. You can read those. It's quite straightforward, and it will tell you how you go about learning. So for activists, they want to be fully engaged with the process. They want to see, touch, and do. That's how they learn. Okay, reflectors, those people tend to read the information. They'll think about what's gone on. They'll think about how it's been used in application, and then they'll think about how it impacts them. Okay, the theorists are trying to link things that they know and processes that they know with what they have read to put it into a framework. Engineers particularly fall into this one. And the pragmatists, all they are about is knowing what works and how to duplicate it. Okay, so how do we deal with that? So as you go through those 80 questions and get that, you'll learn a little bit about yourself, about how you learn and why your learning styles are, and the things that frustrate you when you're not getting all the information that you need. Okay, so parts of psychometric testing, but good things for you to know about how you learn, and good things to know about as you're entering the profession, the sorts of things, oops, where are we? Up here, the sorts of things that you will be best contributing to within your profession at this outset start. Okay, so that's enough for that. I will fill these in and try and do it for Mr. Bean, and I'll post that up over the next day or so to give you an example of how that's gone, so that everybody can see how it goes together and they can do their own. I don't think you'll have any problems with it, and I think you'll be quite interested in doing it. And my guess is by the end of tonight, before you go to bed, you'll have those answers, because it's actually quite interesting, because it's about you. All right, back to the workshop. Okay, and we'll go back down to the reflective journal after the Belbin analysis. So when you've gone through the Belbin analysis, okay, so the question here is, irrespective of the results of the team position, what can you be expected to do on a team in future, and what else might you need to develop to change your skills to actually give you experience in other parts and be able to do other jobs. Okay, as I said, the highest scores will tell you your most preferred roles. Okay, as technically trained people, you should consider that you are specialists and you'll gain knowledge quickly and be expected to contribute to that specialist capacity. You're also team workers and you're also resource investigators. Okay, so they are things that you need to act on at this stage of your career to actually get enthused about your profession. If you're not enthused about your profession, there's nothing wrong with the degree you're doing. It just means probably in the longer term that unless something turns up that really interests you, you will drift away from professional civil engineering. You'll go to other capacities. That's reminded me of another thing which I'll mention before the end of the lecture. Okay, into the future, as you gain more experience and knowledge, then superiors in having more confidence in you will capitalise on that experience, and you can expect to undertake the shaper roles, the coordinator and the implementer roles. Okay, and I already have touched on that. Okay, you can write about that in your reflective journal if you want to put a page or a third of a page or half a page as part of your writings. Okay, and you might want to deal with the Honey and Mumford analysis about how you engage with your learning, what actually motivates you, and what other things that actually allow you to develop your understanding. Okay, and for some of you, you might have thought your learning style is one way, but in doing this analysis, you found that it's actually not that way at all. And as a result that'll be frustrating for you, but you can then start to think about how you rationalise this to get the best with your learning. Okay. When I do the undergraduate construction subjects, I reckon I will be giving this to these young guys going into engineering. It's a really important point. Okay, so that completes the workshop tonight. We're just coming up to 9:15. It's been quite a long session. The other thing that I was just alluding to, within this course, there may be some students that aren't civil or environmental engineers, or they're not connected to this school. If you are one of those students and you've come from another school, would you send me an email, please, and just explain to me that you're in 9744, CVEN 9744, and that you're from the electrical engineering school or the mechanical engineering school, because I'm talking mostly about civil engineering elements of work and the environmental engineering elements of work, and I just need to know if I've got students from other sections within the university so that I can keep some perspective around that for you. Okay, for those students, the way that I describe civil engineering in particular is we design and build anything in community that stands still, with the exception of houses. Okay, that's the building industry's requirement. And there is some crossover when we start to build specialist buildings like hospitals, multi-storey buildings. They can be built by either profession, but effectively civil engineering in particular is dealing with big issues of landscape, roadways, drainage, water movements, dams and storage of water. We were dealing with transport systems, railways, airports. Okay, mechanical engineers put all of the equipment on that, such as trains, trams, cars, and so on. And then I could go into all of the other sections of engineering, but we'll be here until tomorrow, so I won't do that. Okay, I'm finished with the lecture material. I'll just stop sharing the screen. If there's any more questions, I'll deal with what I've got up here. Next question that's come up is, are we recommended to include readings in the journal? By all means. Okay, so as you are doing further reading, if you want to scope out more things that interest you in terms of your journal, and might be things that we've touched on, but you want to go into that deeper, by all means do that. That's all part of the learning. And you might do that because you want to pursue this in maybe another 2 or 3 years' time, and there may be some management issues that you want to develop out, and you found some sources for that, and you know that in 2 years' time when you go to read this back, you'll get those sources and information details, and you might have a few notes in there that will help you fathom out some of these other questions about engineering and the link with engineering and management, and how you might be running teams yourself. Okay, you can do a points allocation. I said to you in the journal and in the writings for the journal, I'll bring that paper, the actual assessment task details up, the assignment task details up in a moment. It's not a matter of writing 3 pages. If you write the 3 pages and you meet the expectations, you're going to wind up with about 70%. So it then gets down to how smart you are in how you compile the journal. So for the student that said here, can we assign points to ourselves on the things that we're doing? You certainly can, okay? Because the points will lead to a graph, and a graph is much easier to digest in terms of outcomes, with only a few brief notes beside it, than writing copious amounts of writing about that information. So yeah, by all means, you can assign points to the things that you've done well, things that you have missed, and the things that you might want to pursue in further detail. Why is there no specialist column? Okay, so I'm presuming that's back in the Belbin, Honey and Mumford detail. I'll go back to that in a moment. Just give me a read. The last question that's come up, could I explain the difference? The difference that you explained about civil and building areas is applicable to tall residential buildings. Okay, in terms of building, if the property has a residence in it, you actually have to have a builder, a licensed builder, to build the building. Okay, if it's got a caretaker's residence in it, it needs a builder to do that. But if we build a multi-storey office tower, a builder or a civil engineer could do that and be allowed to do it, because you don't need a builder's license for that. That's just the peculiarities of how the licensing requirements go. To actually build these multi-storey structures, and I'm engaged because I'm president of the Australian Institute of Building in New South Wales, which is equivalent to the Institution of Engineers. So I'm in charge of the organisation here in New South Wales for builders. One of the things that comes up is there's now an appointed building commissioner reviewing the industry, and collectively, both through the professions of architecture, through building, through engineering, structural engineering, fire safety engineering, and all the other engineering tasks that we might do, such as drainage work and plumbing work. There's a big review on Class 2 buildings, and Class 2 are residential towers, as to the performance of how they're being built in the past and at present. So our industry is under an enormous review at this point in time. Okay, and part of it is that we're not integrating properly across our professional disciplines where the takeover and handover points are in the industry. Okay, and so these teams that I'm talking about tonight are not functioning fully to the extent that they will. Now, for a person who signs the contract for these buildings, they are wholly and solely responsible as the organisation and the individuals representing. And what they're reliant on is good teamwork from the other professions. If they don't get it, the contracts don't go well, and there's problems with the building in the longer term. The industry at this stage, and through the Building Commissioner, is looking to address that. So a lot of the stuff that I'm saying here has very direct applicability to industry. So to go back to the question, it says here, the difference that you explained about civil and building areas is too applicable to, I don't fully understand what that means, too applicable to tall residential buildings. Okay, so residential buildings, as I said, have to have a licensed builder as the contract signatory, and that can be somebody like Lend-Lease with their building, and Lend-Lease does some civil engineering as well, but it can also just be a specialist building company and not a civil contracting company. And so it goes on. It could be that the company has a mix, and most of them do have a mix of engineers and builders to be able to solve a lot of the problems that they've got. But the very specialised areas of knowledge are often being glossed over. Okay, so just be aware of that. All right, I want to just go back to this previous question, that why is there no specialist column? So just let me go back to the Honey and Mumford questionnaire. Okay, open Honey and Mumford. I'll share this with you. Okay, it should come up now. So there's no specialist column. Okay, so you can see down here there's a specialist column. Okay, if you think about that, probably you guys have seen the TV show with the marionettes on it with Thunderbirds, and we had the guy in there as the puppet with brains. He was the specialist. Okay, let's go back to this. Does the specialist fit into this group? It probably does, but it comes about for you guys as you gain specialist knowledge. What will happen with a specialist, they will actually leave an organisation and they'll tend to be self-sufficient in their own right, and therefore they don't fit into an organisational chart any longer. The specialist is actually doing the things that they like to do for themselves, and they are employed by organisations such as this because of that speciality they possess. Okay, so what does that mean for you guys? That as you go through an organisation and you work in teams and you pick some of this detail up, you'll come here, you'll be enthusiastic as a plant and be able to bring all these multifunctional things together and get out a good solution. And you've been a resource investigator. It is actually shaping you to be a specialist, and you might find a niche in the industry whereby you would become the specialist in the industry. And so you will actually leave all of this stuff to concentrate on that as the specialist. And as the specialist, you'll be employed by all of these people to give that very specialist information that they need to do that job. That's the best I can explain it. I think it fits with the industry, and it allows you, after working for an organisation for a number of years, to think, can I make a go of this engineering career in this part of the industry that I know so well, a seriously employable detail for my own purposes. Okay, so I'll go back to the questions. Okay, so I think that's got all the details answered. Before we finish up, I just want to go back to the reflective journal, individual assignment, reflective journal. Yep. Okay, so I've given you the I went through this last week with the instructions. I've given you some things that you might think about in your journal of how to write that. Add that detail that I've given tonight and the topics that I've covered, and start to draft out what you think. Your problem won't be in filling the 3 pages. Your problem will be culling down what you include and what you exclude. Okay, think about that detail with the psychologist report on from Keane, I think it was, for that really long article. Do you have to read that? No, you don't. Can you read it? Yes, you can. But think about how I've staged for you how to read articles. That's the sort of stuff that might be important to you in your reflective journal, that you've learned how to read articles without reading them from front to back. It's about picking out the specialist information that you need from the articles. And so you're reading things for reference purposes, you're not reading them for the story. Okay, that's the detail. All right, the reason why I've gone to this is the question that came up on the discussion tonight was how I was going to mark the journal, and I haven't given you a marking detail on this. I will develop that up over the coming couple of weeks. Hopefully I'll get it out this week, but if I don't get it out this week, it'll come over the next couple of weeks so that you know how I'm, what I'm looking for in the journal, and give you the ideas of how to write it. The last part for this, okay, so coming about. Yeah, I've given to you the reflective journal exemplars. So these are the details that other people have written and how they put their journal together with cover sheets and the like. You can have a look at those, of how they've put all that together to their own purposes and how they've gone about written that. Okay, the reflective journal would be written for 7 weeks, right? Okay, that's actually wrong. The reflective journal is written for 9 weeks. So if I go back to the reflective journal, I open that up again quickly. I didn't share that with you before, I don't think, so I better do that now. Share. Okay, so we'll share that with you. Okay. Okay. Now, I thought I'd put in here. Okay, it's not specifically written in here as to how many weeks it is, but I had that as 9 weeks. I'll see if it's in the course outline. I think I put it there. So the course outline says, go down to this part, I think is where it's at. So reflective journal, yeah. Each student will be required to produce a reflective journal of their learning throughout the semester, or the term it should be. The submission of the reflective journal shall be due in week 9 as noted below, and it will be set out accordingly. Yeah, and in this assessment overview, there's some details in here about how it's to be done, but effectively the journal is a reflection on their learning of the week for courses for weeks 1 to 9 inclusively. Okay, so you'll do it for week 1 and you'll do the last one in week 9, and so it's a 9-week reflective journal. Okay, and you can talk about your class tests and other things in there, and so it goes on. All right, but I will put up a marking rubric to give you ideas on how that will be done. Okay, back to the questions. All right, so I'll stop sharing now. Okay. Yeah, so the question here about the reflective journal, 9 weeks. You have 2 non-class weeks, yep. So there'll be nothing in week 6 and there'll be nothing in week 8, will there? Because there's no classes on those. Sorry, there's nothing in week 6. And no, there's only one non-class week, which is week 6 from my recollection. We'll do all those weeks. Okay, any other questions, guys? All right, being 9 o'clock, we just should be finishing up, so I will. If there's any other questions you want of it, put it on the discussion board. If there's people here that aren't doing civil or environmental engineering, would you just let me know by sending me an email, please? Thank you.